The first time I saw Rebecca Sloan, I was sitting in a wheelchair outside the maternity, admitting desk with my dress damp against my legs, one hand locked around the armrest, and the other pressed beneath my belly as if I could hold my son, safely inside me by force. A nurse had just asked whether my husband was parking the car. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Before I could decide whether to lie or break apart in front of strangers, a woman in a navy suit stepped through the double doors, holding a dark folder against her chest. Her eyes moved from my wet clothes to my shaking hands, then to the name on my hospital bracelet. "Eliza Marlowe," she asked. I nodded, terrified she was about to tell me something was wrong with my insurance, my baby, or my body. Instead, she looked at the nurse and said, "Do not contact her husband yet. After what happened this morning, Mr. Vale no longer receives automatic access to this room." 6 hours earlier, I had been standing in our apartment bedroom, watching Carter Vale zip his suitcase with the calm confidence of a man who had already chosen himself. The nursery door was open behind him. The crib sheets were washed, the tiny gray socks were lined in the drawer, and my hospital bag sat by the entryway with a folder of birth documents tucked inside. My induction was scheduled for the next morning, because my blood pressure had been rising, and my doctor had told me twice not to stay alone if the pain changed, or my water broke. Carter knew that. He had been sitting beside me when Dr. Patel said it. But that morning, while I sat on the edge of the bed breathing through a hard low pressure in my back, he only glanced at me and said, "You're making yourself nervous because you don't like the trip." The trip. As if the problem was jealousy, not the fact that I was one day away from giving birth. It was not just any trip, according to Carter. It was a Vale family tradition, though. I had never been invited to anything that felt like family, unless my job was to smile beside him in photos. His parents, Bernard and Victoria, had rented a private waterfront villa in the San Juan Islands to celebrate some hospitality partnership they said would change the future of wellness travel. Carter had talked about it for weeks. More excited about fairy times and seafood dinners than the birth of our son. When I told him I had been cramping since dawn, he slipped a folded shirt into his suitcase and said first babies were dramatic before they were real. "You'll probably still be pregnant when I get back tonight," he said. "Mom says women always panic at the end." I stared at him, waiting for his face to soften. It didn't. His phone buzzed and he smiled when he saw Victoria's name. "They're already downstairs," he said, as if that settled everything. I followed him into the hallway because some foolish part of me still believed that if he saw how pale I was, he would remember he had once promised to protect me. The pressure in my pelvis sharpened with every step. I kept one hand on the wall while Carter dragged his suitcase toward the elevator. "It's 20 minutes. He stopped and looked back, annoyed, not frightened. "Eliza, I can't keep canceling my life every time you feel something." That sentence hit me harder than the pain. My life had already shrunk to blood pressure checks, swollen ankles, sleepless nights, and folding baby clothes alone, while he took calls from his mother in the next room. Yet somehow in his version of the world I was the one demanding too much. The elevator opened with a soft chime, and Carter stepped in first. We made it as far as the marble lobby before my water broke. There was no dramatic scream, no movie moment, no time to prepare myself. Just a sudden warmth down my legs, a spreading stain beneath me, and the terrifying knowledge that my body had crossed a line no one could ignore. "Carter," I whispered. He turned, irritated that I had stopped walking. I looked down, then back at him. "My water broke. We need to go now." For 1 second, I saw panic flash across his face. I reached for his arm, believing that instinct would finally defeat selfishness. But then his eyes shifted to the lobby floor, to the couple by the mailboxes, to the concierge desk where Alicia Marino had just looked up from her computer. Carter lowered his voice. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I stared at him, not understanding. He pulled his suitcase closer and said, "Don't make a scene. We can call you a ride." "A ride," I repeated because the words made no sense. He was standing 3 feet away from me with car keys in his hand. His black SUV was parked outside the front doors. His wife was in labor. His son was coming. Carter's jaw tightened, as if I were forcing him into cruelty instead of simply revealing what was already there. "The ferry won't wait, Eliza. Dad booked the transfer. Mom will lose her mind if I don't show." I grabbed the edge of the lobby table when another contraction rolled through me. Alicia stepped out from behind the desk, her face changing instantly. Mrs. Vale, are you in labor? Carter answered before I could. She's fine. She just needs to calm down. Alicia ignored him and came toward me. Carter looked at his watch, then at me, and said the sentence that ended my marriage before our child had even taken his first breath. Call an ambulance, or one of those rideshare cars. I can't miss this family commitment. For a moment nobody moved. Alicia's eyes widened with the kind of disbelief people show when cruelty happens in a clean, expensive place where everyone thought appearances meant safety. Carter leaned close, not to comfort me but to warn me. Do not start something with my parents today, he said. I'll call when we get to the villa. Then he walked out through the glass doors, dragging his suitcase behind him while I stood in a puddle of my own fear. Through the windows, I watched him put the suitcase into the SUV. He did not look back until Alicia shouted his name. Even then, he only lifted one hand in frustration before getting inside. The car pulled away from the curb slowly, almost politely, and disappeared into morning traffic. That was the strange part. Nothing exploded. The lobby lights stayed bright. The elevator kept humming. The world allowed him to leave. Alicia caught me before my knees gave out. Look at me, Eliza, she said, firm but gentle. You are not alone. I used to work emergency intake. We're going now. She wrapped her cardigan around my waist, without making me feel ashamed, called ahead to street. Aurelia, and helped me into her small blue sedan with steady hands. My phone started buzzing before we reached the first traffic light. Carter sent 3 messages in a row. Don't make this bigger than it is. Mom is upset already. Text me once you're checked in, so I know you're safe. I stared at the screen, shaking with pain and something colder than grief. He wanted confirmation without responsibility. He wanted information without presence. He wanted to still be called a husband after behaving like a stranger. Alicia saw my face and said, "You don't have to answer him." I turned the phone over on my lap and focused on breathing. By the time we reached Street Aurelia Women's Hospital, the contractions were close enough that the nurse at the entrance did not waste time asking polite questions. They put me in a wheelchair, checked my bracelet, and wheeled me toward maternity admitting while Alicia stayed beside me like a shield. I remember the smell of sanitizer, the sound of monitors, the blur of soft pink walls, and the terrible emptiness of the space where Carter should have been walking. When the nurse asked who my support person was, I looked at Alicia. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm here as long as she wants me." That was when the admitting clerk frowned at her computer. "Mrs. Vale," she said carefully, "we have several notes attached to your file. There was a request submitted about visitor access and medical updates." My blood went cold. Submitted by who, I asked. Before she could answer, Rebecca Sloan walked in with that dark folder. And everything I thought I knew about my marriage began to unravel. Rebecca Sloan did not introduce herself like someone who had come to offer comfort. She introduced herself like someone who had arrived to stop a crime before it could finish happening. "I'm hospital counsel for Street Aurelia," she said, lowering her voice as the nurse pushed my wheelchair toward a private intake room. "I know this is frightening timing, Mrs. Vale, but I need to confirm something before your labor progresses further. Did you personally authorize your mother-in-law, Victoria Vale, to receive medical updates, approve visitors, or make changes to your birth plan?" The question was so strange that for a moment I forgot the pain. "No," I said. "I never gave Victoria anything." Rebecca's expression did not change, but the air around her seemed to sharpen. She opened the folder just enough for me to see printed emails, a form with my married name typed across the top, and a signature that looked like mine if someone had only seen it from a Christmas card. "That is what I suspected," she said. The nurse moved me onto a bed and wrapped monitors around my belly, while Alicia stood near the door, arms folded, watching Rebecca, with the alertness of someone who understood danger, did not always come through shouting. My contractions were strong enough now that the room blurred at the edges every few minutes, but fear kept pulling me back into focus. "What did Victoria send?" I asked. Rebecca waited until the nurse finished checking the baby's heartbeat. The fast little rhythm filled the room, and I clung to it like a rope. Only when the nurse nodded did Rebecca answer. 3 days ago, our system received a visitor and communication preference form, naming Victoria Vale as a secondary family contact. This morning another request came in asking staff to notify her immediately upon your admission, and to allow Mr. Carter Vale and his parents into the delivery suite regardless of your condition. I stared at her. Regardless of my condition. Rebecca's mouth tightened. Those were the words used. Alicia whispered something under her breath that I was glad the nurse pretended not to hear. I wanted to be shocked, but a deeper part of me recognized Victoria in every line. She had always treated my pregnancy like a family event she owned. She criticized my doctor, questioned my diet, bought nursery decorations I never asked for, and once told me that a veil baby should not be hidden away behind modern privacy nonsense. Carter had laughed when I complained, and said his mother was just excited. But sitting in that hospital bed with my water broken and my husband gone, excitement looked a lot like control. My phone buzzed again on the table beside me. Alicia glanced at it. "It's him," she said. Carter had sent another message. "Mom says the hospital is not answering. Fix that before she gets more upset." I let out a laugh that turned into a cry when the next contraction hit. Even now, I was still being ordered to manage his mother. Rebecca waited until the pain passed, then placed a clean sheet of paper on the rolling tray beside my bed. "Eliza, I need you to listen carefully. You are the patient, not your husband, not his mother, not his family. Unless a court order says otherwise, you decide who receives your medical information and who enters this room. If those forms were submitted without your consent, we will lock down your chart, remove unauthorized contacts, and place a security note on your file." Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight I had not heard from anyone in months. Carter always made me feel dramatic for needing help. Victoria made me feel childish for wanting boundaries. Rebecca made it sound simple. My body was mine, my labor was mine, and no one got to walk into it just because they carried the right last name. I looked at the paper, then at the monitor, where my son's heartbeat continued steady and strong. "Do it," I said. The first call from Victoria came less than 10 minutes after Rebecca changed the file. The admitting desk declined to connect her, and somehow that made my phone explode. Carter called twice, then texted, "Why is Mom being told she has no access? What did you say to them?" I did not answer. Then Bernard sent a message from a number I had never saved but recognized immediately from the cold, formal tone. "Eliza, this is not the time for emotional theatrics. Our family has invested a great deal in giving this child stability. You would be wise not to create unnecessary hostility during such an important weekend." I read it once, then handed the phone to Rebecca because my hands were shaking too badly. She took a photo of the message with her hospital device, then asked my permission to document it in the security record. "Yes," I whispered. "Document everything." It felt strange how powerful those two words were. Not forgive everything. Not explain everything. Document everything. Labor moved slowly and brutally after that. My body knew what to do, but my mind kept returning to the lobby, to Carter's suitcase wheels, clicking across marble, to the way he had looked more embarrassed by my water breaking than afraid for our son. Alicia stayed beside me through every check, every nurse change, every cold wave of humiliation that rose, when another message lit up my phone. Carter finally called again just after noon. Rebecca asked if I wanted to decline it. I surprised myself by saying no. "Put it on speaker," I said. I wanted one chance to hear whether the man I married still existed somewhere inside the man who had left me. His voice came through sharp and breathless. "Eliza, what the hell is going on? My mother says the hospital is treating her like some stranger. Dad is furious. We are about to board the ferry and you need to call them right now." There it was. Not "Are you safe?" Not "How is our baby?" Not "I'm coming back." Just another demand from a man already moving farther away. I looked at Rebecca and she gave the smallest nod, reminding me that silence could be a boundary. "Carter," I said, my voice thin but steady, "I am in labor." He sighed, actually sighed, as if my timing was still the inconvenience. "I know that, Eliza. You texted Alicia, didn't you? She made this worse. I told you I'd check in when we arrived." A contraction began rising through my spine, but anger rose faster. "You left me in the lobby after my water broke." There was a pause. In the background, I heard Victoria's voice asking what I was saying. Carter lowered his voice. "Don't phrase it like that. You had help. You were never in real danger." Rebecca's pen stopped moving for half a second. Alicia's face hardened. I gripped the bedrail and forced myself to ask the question I already knew the answer to. "Are you coming to the hospital?" Carter was silent long enough for my heart to split cleanly. Then he said after the welcome lunch, "I can't turn everyone around because you're upset. That was the moment grief stopped begging. Something inside me went very quiet, not peaceful, but final. I could hear the ferry terminal announcements through his phone, the bright vacation noise of people rolling luggage and laughing while I lay under fluorescent lights trying to bring his child safely into the world. "Then don't come," I said. Carter made a frustrated sound. "Eliza, don't start this. A good wife doesn't punish her husband during the birth of his son." Rebecca leaned forward and spoke for the first time, her voice crisp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Vale, this is Rebecca Sloan, counsel for Street Aurelia Women's Hospital. Mrs. Vale has revoked all non-essential access to her medical information and delivery room. Any further attempt to pressure her during labor will be documented as harassment." Carter went silent. Then Victoria shouted from somewhere behind him, "Who is that woman? Eliza, what have you done?" I closed my eyes and let Rebecca end the call. Afterward, I expected to fall apart, but instead I felt strangely awake. The pain was still there. The fear was still there. But the fog Carter and his family had kept around me for years was lifting. Rebecca sat beside the bed and explained the next steps. Security would be notified. No visitors would be allowed without my verbal permission. My chart would be restricted. Any forged or questionable documents would be preserved. Then she hesitated, studying me as if deciding whether my heart could carry one more truth before my body delivered a child. "There is something else," she said. "It concerns your mother, Catherine Marlowe." My breath caught. My mother had died when I was 19, and nobody in the Vale family ever said her name unless they were reminding me I had no powerful relatives left to defend me. Rebecca opened the dark folder again. "Eliza, your admission to Street Aurelia triggered a legal notification that has been waiting for almost 11 years. Your mother left instructions for this day." For a moment the room disappeared. Not literally, of course. The monitors still beeped, the IV still tugged at my hand, and Alicia was still standing near the window with her jaw clenched like she was holding back words Carter deserved to hear. But when Rebecca said my mother's name, I was 19 again, sitting beside a hospital bed holding Catherine Marlowe's thin fingers while she told me to become kinder than the world had been to her. My mother had been a doctor. But to me, she was the woman who packed my lunch, sang off-key while cleaning the kitchen, and kept a jar of emergency chocolate in her desk drawer. She had never looked rich. She had never spoken like someone powerful. After she died, I inherited a few boxes, her wedding ring, and enough savings to finish college if I worked part-time. That was what I believed. So when Rebecca said she had left instructions for the birth of my first child, I whispered, "That's impossible." Rebecca's face softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Your mother created the Marlowe Maternal Trust after leaving private practice. Most people know it as a non-profit grant fund attached to Street Aurelia, but legally it is much larger than that. It funds maternal safety programs, legal advocacy for pregnant patients, emergency housing, and medical privacy defense. Dr. Marlowe placed the controlling trustee rights in escrow until two conditions were met: for your 30th birthday and the birth of your first living child." I stared at her as another contraction built slowly like thunder moving closer. "I turned 30 last month," I said. Rebecca nodded. "And you were admitted in active labor this morning." That triggered the notice. "Eliza, as of today, you are not just a patient here. You are the incoming trustee of one of the most influential maternal health foundations in the Pacific Northwest." My mind could not hold the sentence. Incoming trustee, influential foundation, my mother, my baby, my husband on a ferry. The contraction hit before I could ask anything else, and for nearly a minute all the secrets in the world became less important than surviving my own body. Alicia came to my side, pressed a cool cloth to my forehead, and coached me through breathing while Rebecca stepped back respectfully. When the pain released, I was crying without realizing it. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. Rebecca sat down beside the bed and folded her hands over the folder. "Because your mother was afraid of exactly this kind of moment. She wanted you to build a life before anyone could use your inheritance to choose one for you. She also left notes about your father's side of the family, old lawsuits and men who become very attentive once money appears." A sad little laugh escaped me. Carter wasn't attentive even when I was 9 months pregnant. Rebecca's expression turned colder. "Then he made your mother's caution look wise." On the table, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Victoria. "You are humiliating, Carter. Remember whose family your child belongs to." Rebecca read the message after I handed her the phone. She did not react dramatically. She simply photographed it, logged it, and placed the phone face down. "This is why we move quickly," she said. "There is another layer. Vale Hospitality Group has been negotiating a partnership with Street Aurelia's Wellness Recovery Initiative. Your husband's father is not just on vacation. He is celebrating early because he believes the board will approve a luxury postpartum retreat connected to this hospital network." Alicia's eyes narrowed. Wait. The same family trying to override her birth plan wants to profit from postpartum care. Rebecca looked at me, not Alicia, when she answered, "Yes. And the Marlowe Maternal Trust has veto power over that partnership. Until this morning, Bernard Vale likely assumed the trust board was a faceless committee. He does not know the controlling trustee is his daughter-in-law." I felt something open beneath the pain, not joy, not revenge, but the first clear shape of justice. The people who had treated my pregnancy like an inconvenience were trying to build an empire on women like me. Carter called again while Rebecca was explaining the emergency trustee documents. I almost declined, but then I saw Alicia glance at Rebecca, and Rebecca quietly turned on the recording function through the hospital's legal line after asking my permission. I gave it. Carter's voice burst into the room before I could speak. "Eliza, my father just got a strange message from the hospital board asking about a delay. What did you do? Not how are you? Not is our son here? Not, I am sorry I left you standing in a lobby because my mother wanted a ferry ride." I closed my eyes. "I didn't do anything, Carter. I'm in labor." He exhaled sharply. "This is exactly what I mean. You always hide behind emotion when real decisions are being made. Dad has millions tied up in this weekend. You need to tell whoever that lawyer is that there's no problem with our family." Victoria's voice cut through the background. "Tell her the baby is a Vale, Carter. She needs to remember that." Rebecca's pen moved silently across her notepad. I watched it and found courage in the tiny motion. "Carter, I said your mother submitted medical access forms. I never signed." Silence. Then he said, "She was trying to help." My heart sank because he did not deny it. "You knew?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough. "I knew Mom had ideas. You were being difficult about visitors and she thought after the birth you'd be too tired to make good choices." Alicia covered her mouth, furious. Rebecca's eyes sharpened, but she said nothing. Carter continued digging the grave himself because he still thought confidence could pass for innocence. "Nobody was hurting you. We just wanted things handled smoothly. You get overwhelmed. Mom understands family image better than you do." I looked down at my belly at the child still inside me and finally understood that they had planned to surround me at my weakest, not support me. "Thank you," I whispered. Carter sounded confused. "For what?" I looked at Rebecca. "For telling the truth." Rebecca ended the call when Carter started demanding to speak with someone rational. Then she placed 3 documents in front of me one by one, explaining each in plain language between contractions. The first locked my medical privacy and barred Carter, Victoria, and Bernard from the delivery room unless I changed my mind in writing after birth. The second preserved all questionable forms, messages, and calls for possible civil or custody proceedings. The third was different. It named me temporary active trustee of the Marlowe Maternal Trust, with authority to suspend any pending partnership that created a conflict with patient safety, coercion, or reputational harm. My hand trembled when Rebecca gave me the pen. "You do not have to think about the business side today," she said gently. "But you do have the right to protect yourself before they realize what you control." Another contraction began hard and deep. I signed my name, before the pain took my breath away. By late afternoon, the sky outside had turned silver with rain and my labor had become a tunnel I could only move through one breath at a time. Nurses came and went. Alicia called my Aunt Nora, the closest thing I had left to a parent, and told her to come quickly. Rebecca stayed nearby, not hovering, just present, like a locked door between me and the people who thought they owned me. My phone had been silenced, but the screen kept lighting up anyway. Carter, Victoria, Bernard, Carter again. Then one message appeared from Bernard that made Rebecca's face turn to stone. "Eliza, whatever you think you have been told, do not sign anything until our attorneys arrive." I looked at those words through a haze of pain and almost smiled. They knew something had shifted. They did not know what yet, but they could feel control slipping out of their hands. At that exact moment, the nurse checked me, looked up, and said, "Eliza, it's time. Your baby is coming." My son was born during a rainstorm, with Alicia holding one of my hands and Aunt Nora gripping the other after arriving breathless from the airport shuttle, her coat still wet and her eyes swollen from crying. There was no Carter in the room, no Victoria arranging photographs, no Bernard making statements about legacy. There was only pain like the doctor's calm voice, and then a furious, beautiful cry that split my life into before and after. When they placed him on my chest, he was warm and slippery and real. His tiny fists curled beneath his chin, as if he had arrived ready to fight the world that had already underestimated his mother. I looked at his face searching for something familiar and found only himself. Not a veil heir. Not a bargaining chip. Not a reason to return to a man who had abandoned us. Noah, I whispered, my lips against his damp hair. Noah Marlowe. Aunt Nora sobbed openly. Alicia turned away, wiping her cheek. Somewhere beyond the locked maternity doors, my old life was starting to collapse. Rebecca waited until Noah was checked, swaddled, and placed safely in my arms before she returned with news that felt almost unreal against the softness of his breathing. The temporary suspension notice has been delivered, she said quietly. I was exhausted, stitched together by adrenaline and awe, but I understood enough. To Bernard, Rebecca nodded. To Bernard Vale, the Street Aurelia Board Liaison and the Partnership Review Committee. The language is formal. It cites concerns involving patient coercion, forged medical access requests, privacy interference, and reputational risk. Aunt Nora looked from Rebecca to me. What partnership? She asked. I looked down at Noah because saying it aloud made everything more absurd. Carter's family wanted to build a luxury postpartum retreat with the hospital network, I said, while trying to force their way into my own delivery room. Rebecca added, the Marlowe Maternal Trust has veto authority. Eliza activated a temporary freeze. Aunt Nora's expression changed from confusion to something fierce. Your mother, she whispered. Catherine always did know how to protect people after she was gone. The first sign that the message had reached the Vale family was not a knock at my door, because security would not allow that. It was Carter's name lighting up my phone 12 times in 7 minutes. Then Victoria. Then Bernard. Then Carter again. Rebecca had already moved all communication to a legal channel, but the sight of their names still made my stomach tighten. For months, those names had meant obligation. Answer quickly. Apologize first. Keep the peace. Now they looked like waves breaking against glass. Alicia glanced at the screen and said, they're not used to doors staying closed. I almost laughed, but Noah shifted in my arms and made a small squeaking sound, and the laugh dissolved into tears. I was not crying because I missed Carter. I was crying because my son would never know the version of me who stood alone in that lobby begging for basic decency. That woman had carried him here, but she would not be the one raising him. By evening, Carter reached the hospital anyway. He came with his parents exactly as Rebecca predicted, because people who believe access is ownership always mistake locked doors for personal insults. A nurse came in first, apologetic but composed. They are at the security desk, she said. Your husband is demanding to speak with you. His mother is crying. His father says this is a legal family matter. Rebecca rose before I could answer. It is a medical privacy matter, she said. And Mrs. Vale has already made her decision. The nurse nodded, relieved to have the words. I asked Alicia to take Noah for a moment because my arms had started trembling. Through the partly open door I could not hear the lobby, but I imagined Carter's face, red-eyed, offended, stunned that the world had not rearranged itself around his inconvenience. Does he know the baby is here? I asked. Rebecca paused. He was informed only that you and the child are medically stable. No name, no room number. No access. That answer should have felt cruel. Instead, it felt safe. Later, Rebecca told me what happened downstairs, because I needed to understand the size of the storm that had passed outside my door. Carter had arrived carrying flowers from the hospital gift shop, the kind bought quickly by men who think proof of regret can be purchased near an elevator. Victoria had a designer's scarf wrapped around her shoulders and kept repeating that she was the grandmother, as if that title were a keycard. Bernard did not shout at first. He asked for the hospital administrator, then the board liaison, then anyone senior enough to handle a misunderstanding. Rebecca met them beside security with 2 officers present. Carter tried to step around her. My wife is confused, he said. She's emotional and being influenced by people who don't know our family. Rebecca opened her folder and asked whether he was referring to the people who drove his wife to the hospital after he left her in active labor. Carter went pale. But Victoria snapped. "That is not the full story," Rebecca replied. "Then you will have the opportunity to explain it through counsel." That was when Bernard learned the freeze was not a clerical delay. Rebecca handed him the formal notice, and according to the nurse, who later whispered the story to Alicia, his face changed before he reached the second paragraph. Wealthy men like Bernard were trained not to react in public, but he reacted. His mouth tightened. His hand gripped the paper too hard. "This trust has no authority to interfere with our negotiated agreement," he said. Rebecca corrected him with the kind of calm that makes anger look childish. "The Marlowe Maternal Trust is not interfering. It is exercising a contractual ethics review right your attorneys accepted in the preliminary memorandum." Carter looked between them lost. "Marlowe?" he asked. Victoria's voice dropped. "What does Eliza have to do with Marlowe?" Rebecca did not smile. She simply said, "That is a question your family might have asked," before attempting to override her medical privacy. For the first time since I married him, Carter had nothing clever to say. By the next morning, the collapse had moved beyond the hospital walls. Bernard's board called an emergency meeting after Street Aurelia's partnership committee postponed the announcement indefinitely. The wellness retreat had been the centerpiece of Vale Hospitality Group's expansion, the project Bernard had promised would attract investors' press and a new class of luxury clients. Without Street, Aurelia and the Marlowe Trust, it was not a visionary postpartum recovery center. It was just another expensive resort with a pretty brochure and no medical credibility. Carter left voicemails through his attorney claiming he had been under family pressure, then sent a message through the legal app saying he loved me and wanted to meet his son. 3 lines later, he asked whether I could clarify to the trust board that this was a private marital misunderstanding. I read that sentence, while Noah slept against my chest, his tiny mouth relaxed, one hand tucked beneath his cheek. Carter still did not understand that my labor was not a public relations problem. Victoria tried a different route. She called Aunt Nora crying so hard her words blurred, saying motherhood made women irrational and that I would regret depriving Noah of his father's people. Aunt Nora put the call on speaker and let Rebecca listen. Victoria said Eliza has always been sensitive. Carter was wrong to leave, but she is destroying an entire family over one mistake. I looked at Noah and felt something ancient and protective settle in my bones. One mistake. As if forged forms were a mistake. As if abandoning me in labor was a mistake. As if trying to profit from postpartum mothers while controlling one in real time was a mistake. Aunt Nora asked Victoria one question. "Did you tell your son to turn the car around?" Victoria went silent. Then she said, "The situation was complicated." Aunt Nora hung up without another word. That silence said more than any speech could have. People like Victoria always wanted forgiveness to begin before accountability, because accountability was the one room where they could not decorate themselves as victims. Carter finally sent one message that almost sounded like grief. "I keep thinking about the lobby. I should have driven you." For several seconds I stared at it, feeling the dangerous pull of the man I used to love. Then another message appeared right beneath it. "If you help fix this with Dad, I can be the husband you needed." There it was again, the hook hidden inside the apology. He would become decent if decency helped him recover what he had lost. I handed the phone to Rebecca. "Save it," I said. She did. Outside my window the rain had stopped and Seattle looked washed clean beneath the pale morning light. I looked at my son, at his dark lashes resting against his cheeks, and I understood the real twist was not that I had inherited power. It was that power had arrived after I no longer needed it to know my worth. Carter had left me one day before birth for a family trip. By the time he came back, the family he thought he controlled had already begun without him. I left Street Aurelia 3 days later through a private side entrance, not because I was ashamed, but because Rebecca said people like the Vales often confused desperation with love. Carter had requested to meet Noah just for 5 minutes, then sent a follow-up message asking whether news of a peaceful family visit might help reassure the partnership committee. That was the last piece of proof I needed. Even his fatherhood came attached to a negotiation. Alicia drove us to Aunt Nora's townhouse in Queen Anne, where the guest room had been transformed overnight with a borrowed bassinet, a rocking chair, and a stack of diapers arranged with the seriousness of emergency supplies. I sat on the edge of the bed holding Noah while rain tapped the window and realized I had not gone home. Not to Carter, not to the condo, not to the life where I had mistaken silence for patience and loneliness for marriage. I was frightened, sore, exhausted, and leaking tears at random, but for the first time in years, no one in the room expected me to make my pain convenient. Rebecca did not become my divorce lawyer, but she introduced me to one Helena Price, a family attorney with silver hair, calm eyes, and the terrifying habit of letting cruel people talk until they buried themselves. Helena filed for legal separation, emergency custody protections, restricted communication, and preservation of all evidence connected to the forged hospital forms. Carter's first response was not an apology. It was a statement through his attorney saying I had misinterpreted a stressful family scheduling conflict and was using our newborn as leverage in an unrelated business dispute. Helena read it aloud in her office while Noah slept in his car seat beside me, then looked up and said, "That is useful." I almost laughed. It turned out men like Carter were easiest to understand on paper. They dressed selfishness in polished language, but the shape remained the same. He had abandoned his laboring wife, allowed his mother to interfere with medical privacy, and then treated the consequences as damage to be managed. Helena kept every word. So did Rebecca. So did I. The court did not care about Carter's wounded pride. It cared about timelines, documents, recordings, hospital notes, and the messages he kept sending despite being warned to stop. In one monitored call, he said I made one bad call, Eliza. 1. Are you really going to make Noah grow up without a proper family because I didn't drive you 20 minutes? I looked through the screen at the man I once loved and saw with painful clarity that he still believed the distance to the hospital mattered more than the abandonment. No, I said. Noah will grow up without being taught that a proper family means his mother has to survive neglect quietly. Carter's face hardened. You sound just like that lawyer. I looked down at my son who was sleeping against my chest, warm and trusting. Good, I said. The judge later granted me primary physical custody, ordered all communication through a parenting app, and allowed Carter only supervised visits until he completed parenting classes, counseling, and a review of the hospital incident. Carter called it humiliation. I called it a locked door, where there should have been one all along. The Vale family's public collapse was quieter than I expected, which somehow made it more satisfying. There was no single dramatic headline, no courtroom speech that ruined them overnight. Instead, their world came apart in board meetings, canceled lunches, unanswered calls, and polite emails that said things like "not aligned at this time." The Street Aurelia partnership never recovered. The Marlowe Maternal Trust issued a careful statement about strengthening protections for pregnant patients from coercion and unauthorized family interference. It did not name Victoria, Bernard, or Carter, but everyone who mattered understood. Bernard stepped down from leading the expansion project after investors questioned his judgment. Victoria resigned from 2 charity committees when other women began asking why someone so passionate about maternal wellness had tried to override a laboring patient's privacy. Carter was moved out of strategic development and into a meaningless advisory role, before eventually leaving the company to pursue independent opportunities. He told people I had destroyed him. The truth was simpler. I had finally stopped protecting him from the mirror. His supervised visits with Noah began when Noah was 4 months old. The first time I saw Carter in the visitation center, he looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way people shrink when charm no longer opens doors. He brought a stuffed whale still wrapped in gift paper and asked the supervisor whether photos were allowed. They were not. He looked disappointed, and I wondered if he had imagined sending proof of fatherhood to someone who needed convincing. Noah, sweet and serious, stared at him with the solemn suspicion babies reserve for unfamiliar faces. Carter's eyes filled with tears, and for one fragile second, I thought maybe fatherhood had reached him at last. Then he looked at me and said, "If you had let me come sooner, he would know me." The old Eliza would have defended, explained, softened the truth so he would not feel cornered. The new one simply said, "He will know people who show up safely and consistently." That is all any child can be promised. Carter looked away first. I became trustee of the Marlowe Maternal Trust on a bright morning in early spring in a conference room overlooking the hospital garden my mother had helped design. Rebecca stood at the back, not as my rescuer but as a witness. Aunt Nora held Noah near the window, bouncing him gently while he chewed on the corner of his blanket. I signed the final documents with my mother's old fountain pen, the one I had kept for years, without knowing she had left me more than memories. Afterward, Rebecca handed me a sealed letter Catherine had written before she died. I read it alone on a bench beneath a cherry tree just beginning to bloom. My mother wrote that power was not meant to make me hard. It was meant to give me choices when love, fear, or loneliness tried to take them away. She wrote that if I was reading her words with my child nearby, then I had already survived something she could not predict but had tried to prepare me for. By the end, the ink was blurred with my tears. A year after Noah was born, I returned to Street Aurelia for the opening of the Marlowe Patient Advocacy Center. It offered emergency legal consultations, privacy protection, transportation assistance, and safe discharge planning for pregnant women who had no one trustworthy beside them. Alicia became one of our first patient support coordinators. Rebecca joined the advisory board. Aunt Nora joked that my mother had built the foundation, but Noah had made me brave enough to walk through its doors. During the ceremony, I held my son on my hip while cameras flashed and donors applauded, but my eyes stayed on a young pregnant woman sitting near the back with a nervous hand on her belly. I recognized that look. I had worn it in a marble lobby while my husband chose a ferry over our child. After the speeches, I found her and said the words I once needed more than anything. "You are the patient. You get to choose who stands beside you." She cried before I finished the sentence. Carter still sends messages, sometimes always through the app, always carefully worded now. He apologizes more than he used to, but apologies are not time machines. They do not drive a woman to the hospital. They do not erase forged forms. They do not turn abandonment into confusion, just because regret finally arrived dressed nicely. I hope he becomes better not for me, but for Noah. But I no longer confuse hope with access or forgiveness with surrender. My son will grow up knowing his father exists, but he will also know his mother chose safety when peace demanded silence. He will know that love is not proven by last names, money, or public speeches about family. It is proven in the moments when someone else's fear interrupts your comfort. Carter failed that moment. My mother prepared me for it. Rebecca protected me through it. Alicia carried me out of it. And Noah gave me the reason to never return to it. One day before birth, my husband abandoned me for a family trip. The next day, a hospital lawyer arrived and handed me back my life.